and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this town hall with Dr. Oby. I already had the chance to have a conversation with her a couple of months ago, and just as a quick background for those of you who don't know, I'm the co-founder of Atlas, the global political movement. We're trying to unite people in all countries across the world in order to be able to deal with global challenges. So dealing with the climate crisis, eradicating poverty, ensuring we live in a fair system of governance, etc. And I talked with Dr. Oby a couple of weeks ago to get her feedback on one of our campaigns, which is the one of running for United Nations Secretary General. The idea basically of taking something that should be a political race and that isn't, and making it more transparent, ideally more democratic, and trying to shock a bit a system that is at this stage what I think unfair for purpose. And we had a discussion, and Dr. Oby gave me lots of ideas to think about. And I'll introduce her at the same time. She has obviously an incredible background. She's the president of Human Capital Africa and senior economic advisor at the Africa Economic Development Policy Initiative. You might know her for being one of the co-founders of Transparency International, an organization that has fought for transparency and against corruption for many, many years. She was Minister of Education and Manual Resources in Nigeria, the former Vice President of the World Bank in the Africa region. She's the founder of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. And I can go on and on and on. Literally, my point being, Dr. Oby, if you want to know how to make institutions, governments, NGOs more transparent, more accountable, she's the person to turn to. Considering the fact that here, a lot of us believe in the idea that we should work together across the world to be able to deal with the urgent challenges of poverty, climate, warfare, and so on, but that we don't see this happening extremely well right now, I asked her to join us to understand how to make the United Nations more accountable. And as she told me in our previous conversation, how to give people a stake in the United Nations. How do we ensure that it answers to us all as people of the world? And I'm sure that she accepted. So as I mentioned, we have collected questions, and I'm going to have a 40 minutes discussion with her, but please ask all of your questions in the chat. We will have 20 minutes to take your questions, ask her, and pick her brains in every direction. So don't hesitate to already put all of your questions in there. Dr. Oby, I can't see you again, but I don't know if it's a connection issue. Can I see you again?
Yeah, like I told you, I have to balance it out. So I try to make sure that I am not steadily on video because of the fragility of the network systems around here. So sometimes I would have to go all audio. Yeah.
Well, right now we see you, so we'll enjoy it while we can. I wanted to get started by asking you, when you look at global challenges like poverty, like climate, I'm repeating myself, do you see any institution right now that is capable of addressing those global challenges? Do you have hope in any of the current institutions?
Thank you very much, Colombe, and all your colleagues in the Atlas movement and your wider networks that you collaborate with on issues that matter to the people, especially the people in communities. The question that you've just thrown at me is the heart of the conversation that happens more frequently these days, interrogating the state of global systems. Basically, questions are being asked whether existing multilateral order and the systems that support that order are adequate or sufficient, or in fact relevant these days for solving the problems that you highlighted, whether they are problems of poverty, of insecurity in our world, whether it's cybersecurity issues, or just basic military level security, or the issues of hunger, issues of poor governance of the oceans, issues of climate change, issues of responding to AI and other transformational technologies by balancing out the threats and the risks against the opportunities that they present. So there's so many issues that are on the table of our global agenda, which matter to citizens. And so these range of issues are struggling back in most of the global conversations that I have participated in, especially the ones where more honest brokers are sitting at the table than mere representatives of governments who have been given a set of talking points on which to respond. You find concern for our world today. There is concern. There is a gap between what the people who ostensibly were the reason for the setting up of the UN and the basic mantra of the UN, which is the mantra of equality of all persons and the dignity of human existence. And those who should uphold those principles. There is a gap. And that gap, is perhaps what you're trying to understand by putting up a conversation around accountability, because we do know that accountability is the basis and it is the backbone for anything that upholds the rules. If there are rules of the game and there are no accountability systems and mechanisms to ensure that those rules are being complied with, you cannot trust in the basic instinct of the human being to be a good person, or the collection of human beings to work within a space to be good people. And that is why accountability systems are crucial. In the current order that we have, hardly any of the multilateral systems have accountability to the people. There are no mechanisms that ensure that level of consequence of action based on the reportage mechanism. There is no reportage mechanism that gives power to the people to punish bad behavior of institutions that exist to serve them at a global level. And that's a major gap in the United Nations systems broadly. There are mechanisms which, citizens were expected to believe would perform that responsibility. So whether it is some of the mechanisms within UN bodies, if the UNDP, has advisory councils and advisory bodies and governance councils that should do that for the people. Well, the UNFP, same thing. The World Health Organization, same thing. The FAO, same thing. There is one system or the other that is supposed to be in existence to enable this accountability, but it's obviously not working in the way that the people want. And why is there such a gap? I think it is the question of trust. I think that trust has irretrievably broken down between the people and formal systems. So we are in a world today where a new generation of people, the people being the millennials and the Gen Zs, and increasingly the alpha generation, who are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions of their parents and the people around them, are asking. And when they ask those questions, they are demanding for answers. And the truth is that there is something about difference in generational mindset. I think that the Gen X's and the baby boomers, who are mostly the people in the world today, other than the millennials, the Gen Zs, and the alphas, the two generations were generations that did not try to disrupt things. But the millennials and the Gen Zs are the disruptive generation. They don't want to stay with things and the order of things that they feel are not working well. And so I applaud that sense of determination for conversations that are very hard for my generation and the ones that came after us, the Gen Xs, to have. What then does that say to us in regard to your question? It is to say that, yes, for your generation, the existing order is not delivering. And if something is not working, then that's when you must fix it. The question then becomes, how do you go about fixing it? And I hope that that's the conversation that we will be having, because I don't have the answers. I just want to be part of you in co-creating a pathway to what the possible sets of answers could be, in every sense, with every sense of humility.
Thank you so much.
Those are my opening words.
Thank you so much. I think you touched on a lot of points that I want to bounce off, and I'm also seeing quite a few comments on this, on the fact that, within the United Nations system, there's little accountability. That's not to say that people in the system don't try their best to quell the challenges you mentioned, from warfare to AI to poverty to pandemics. But there's very few ways for us, the people, to have a say in this very system and to hold leaders accountable to it. And then if we look at the makeup of the UN, I'm saying us, but we see a system of first and second class countries where a few countries have a right of veto and the rest of the world doesn't. And no African country is part of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And as this system was built in a still colonial or very, very newly born post-colonial world, which represents the structures of the time. So there's so many aspects that I think the United Nations needs to reform in order to be able to bridge this gap of the lack of accountability, the lack of representation, etc. But my question, understanding that you don't have all of the answers, obviously, is how can we do so when a lot of members of this institution are authoritarian countries? How can we lobby, push, and try to create a United Nations system that is more accountable to us, the people of the world, more representative, where we have a say when, and I'm obviously oversimplifying it, but a part of the world doesn't believe in representation. And those countries that theoretically believe in democracies often have a stake in ensuring that not more countries have a say in the system, or that not more people have a say of the system, and are very scared of who might have a say next.
So you really have your pulse on those critical issues, and I think that the way to approach answers to the questions would be to, as much as possible, be analytical on how those questions have arisen in the first place, and the analytical frame that led to the existence of the United Nations, as you know, happened within a period in history when some countries had gone ahead of the others in terms of development. And so there was basically a leg up that other countries had. And so in the formation of the United Nations as the successor organizations to the League of Nations, following the aftermath of the Second World War, you could tell clearly that the powers that were the Allied forces had a very strong, relevance and power to exercise. Most of Latin America, most of Asia, most of Africa, Middle East, were still trapped in poverty and dealing with, it being inconsequential economically, other than being either buying posts or posts for the supply of what the capitalist expansionist model of that era was, pushing. And so the existence of those institutions did, as a matter of fact, reflect the image of the countries that had the towering strength of that period. Now, as we have seen, regardless of the challenges that we confront today, at a reasonable level, at least until about even the 70s and the 80s, there was a semblance of a world order that managed to exist. And then gradually, as things began to change and the evolution of the world moved in the direction that other countries and other continents could also grow and become dominant, or if not dominant, they can at least be relevant to the world. We now see the global shifts, the geopolitical shifts, the economic shifts are things that are now requiring that a different period in history is upon us. With this new period in history, I think that there are multiple diversities that need to be recognized and put on the table, much in the same way as in the era of the formation of the United Nations, certain dynamics were the basis, the rationale for the way that it was constructed. So also must then the argument be that there is an era in history that has changed, and that with this change, it requires all reasonable people to recognize that you cannot solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions. Some of yesterday's solutions would be relevant, but you would have to upgrade the content of today's solutions. So to that extent, therefore, when we look at the matter of the structure of the United Nations and the fact that the General Assembly is the assembly that enables all states to be one state, one vote, but that there is a superordinate structure that then exists, which becomes the overarching authority over the one state, one vote. In the era of the 45, 50, 60, 1980, maybe that was not so bad. But in an era where even countries who are members of the United Nations are in themselves having to deal with exactly the same matter of dynamics of relationship, okay, the power relations between the state and the people at domestic level is changing. It is radically changing. In the past, citizens did not understand so much their power in democratic constructs. As a matter of fact, they simply would be handed the right to vote. For example, women got that very late in most democracies, including the United States of America. So that was a constituency. Women were excluded very much from democracy in an era when there was no question about it. In today's era, you cannot, keep women away from democracy. They are participants in voting, but they are participants in also wanting to be voted for. Periodic issues are basically the basis of reviewing systems and recognizing that times have changed. The recognition that times have changed would now need to be global. We don't yet have a global consensus that times have changed. So for those of you who are the younger generation of people who see that times have changed, you will be considered the global elite of your own generation. You are also now a global elite class that are in your generation. Now think of the numerous members of your same generation who have been outside the privilege of education, not to talk of outside the privilege of political literacy. Would you say that you speak for them? You cannot say you speak for them until they actually give you the legitimacy to do so. And so the first thing in terms of an analytical framing of the approach for engaging this conversation is for you to, in fact, gain your legitimacy. So first, how do we gain that legitimacy in a critical path toward saying we're speaking for all of us around the world in saying that times have changed? The one data that haunts me every day is the data that says that 6 out of every 10 children in the world are not achieving minimum proficiency level in literacy and numeracy. So we still got a huge population of our world today that should be knowledgeable by reading, by being numerate, that are not. Are we speaking for them? Are we representing them when we ask for the things we ask for? So how do we crack that particular code of gaining legitimacy from those that are outside of knowledge of what we're even talking about? And so knowledge of what we're talking about takes me to the second point, which is that even amongst your generation that are aware of the existence of the United Nations, how relevant do they think that United Nations is to their daily life? In the daily life of those, another piece of data, in Africa, 12 million young people join the unemployment the labor market every year. 12 million, about 12 to 30 million. Data shows that only 10% of them will ultimately find what the ILO, International Labour Organization, calls decent work. Now, 10%. So the other 90% are outside of opportunities, right? Now, how do we get this 90% to actually think that the UN is in any way relevant to them? When 90% of them, a significant population, may not even realize that their governments are relevant to their situation. So the relevance question is critical. Otherwise, it would just be that, Colombe is a very worldly wise young woman. She cares about what happens in the international system. Therefore, she's trying to force this on the truth of well, this is not my priority. We want to close that gap. United Nations system, a table around which the world gathers, economy, to look at issues of lopsidedness, of access and opportunities, to look at issue of global governance and how a political, authority is being used or misused, to look at issues of human rights and how, the territorial integrity of countries matter, to look at issues of global bads like terrorism, like health pandemics, and all these other issues that we have to deal with. It is a relevant institution, but we need to close the gap in terms of getting people to understand that if the UN didn't exist, we do need it. We must have a UN. Now, the issue then takes me to the third part of my critical analytical frame for considering the question, is that if we know that if the UN did not exist, we do need a UN, which appears to be an oxymoron, right? Considering that we are coming from the framework that the UN as currently constituted is not doing what it should do, how then are we calling for another UN in the absence of that? And it is to recognize that we do need a system, we need a mechanism, we need something that helps us to optimize the opportunities we have as a world, to be an orderly world, to be a peaceful world, to be an inclusive world that inclusively prospers, a world that tackles inequality while optimizing the rules of people putting their best foot forward and being adequately rewarded for their talent or for their industry. We recognize all of that, but we're saying that the current structure and system of how the world operates, the operating system of the world is not permitting that. And so we need a system, whether it is called the United Nations or it is called the Federated Nations or whatever it is called, we need it to reflect our diversity. We need it to reflect, diversity in terms of everything you can imagine that is primordial, whether it is a language, ethnic group, and all the other things. We needed to reflect our diversities in terms of geographies. We needed to reflect our diversities in terms of economic status and all whatnot. We needed to reflect our diversity in terms of gender. We needed to reflect our diversities in terms of age. We needed to reflect our diversities in terms of persuasion and belief and ideology. So getting to that diversity would then mean, getting to a good reflection of such diversities would mean coming to the table that says, let's get a clean slate. We can't build on the existing order. We can't try to skirt little margins of correction of an existing order that clearly has a sell-by date. And that sell-by date, even our problems, neither are we, in fact, doing better on the things that we have done well with. Just look at the basic issue of the market and capitalist models of economy that is just so correlated to democracy, right? Openness, democracy, freedom, political freedom, market freedom, economic freedom, and all of it. They are so correlated, they are interlinked. And we see that they have in fact delivered. It has delivered better than other economic systems. This is analytical. This is not, oh, I love capitalism, therefore I vote for it. No, it's that the data shows that it has delivered better. But even though it has delivered better, it has left a lot of people behind, and that's what will show up in inequality. So the sane mind, the reasonable mind, must then ask a question and say, how do we solve for these other consequences of this model that has delivered? Those kinds of questions are design level questions. So I am of the opinion that the way we get from where we are to where we should be is really to unpack all of these things that I have been saying, and then to say, give us a clean slate. Give us a clean slate. So we start a design process toward solutions that optimize our collective opportunities in an inclusive manner, and yet minimize the risks and the threats and the dangers that are hobbling nations from being, and people from being what they can reasonably be in today's world.
Thank you for this. There's so much to bounce off, but I think I have time for one last question before I open it up to the floor. I couldn't agree more with what you said on the education gap and all of this. I think your first point on the fact that we need a global understanding that the world has changed is beginning to exist amongst most people on certain topics. For example, if you look at the situation in Gaza and Israel's war on Gaza, most people across the world, public opinion have shifted, would agree that the current system is failing the people of Palestine, is failing the people of Gaza. That the fact that, some of the most powerful countries at the United Nations keep on sending weapons to Israel amidst claims of genocide and is a mockery of the United Nations purpose, of its aim of ensuring peace and security. So I think on certain topics, we see this, I don't know if it's a global consciousness, but we see people's outrage, people's anger at a system that is failing on one of its core mandates, on the one of peace, on the one of security, on the one of ensuring that we don't have yet another genocide after another genocide. I agree that, as it's being mentioned in the chat, on Russia sitting in the Security Council and while it's invading Ukraine, you could say that about most of the P5 that are involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity. My country, France, sends weapons to Saudi Arabia that are then used against Yemeni civilians. So I could keep on going with this list. I think the consciousness exists on certain topics, not on all, I agree. Most people wouldn't see the use of the United Nations in reducing poverty, eradicating diseases, and regulating AI and more. But on war, we see its failures. So I wonder if there's a way of giving people a stake in the system to reform it. As you said, we need a blank slate. We need people to come. We need people to come up with a better way of governing. We need people to come up with a better way of working together. And the problem, and it's always like this when you want to change a system, is that those who currently hold the power have no intention or interest in enabling this, right? The Permanent Five of the United Nations, and I'm not speaking for them, but would probably prefer anything but to give up their veto power. And it's why at Atlas we're doing this campaign to challenge the Secretary General selection process, even though this person doesn't have actual power, but to signify that there needs to be a radical change in the United Nations. But how would you go about starting this change? How would you go about forcing those countries to give us a clean slate, to come together and move forward?
Yes, so by first applauding even the little effort you've started, because conversations like what we're having are important. Those whom you have been in touch with, and frankly speaking, I don't ever bother myself to be discouraged by the number of people who come around the first time I raise an idea to be important. I never bother myself. I think I must have told you when we first spoke how today's organization that you know as Transparency International was just a few bunch of us. I was one of the 3 youngest of people, with the rest of them being very accomplished elderly gentlemen, most of them gentlemen, former presidents, former ministers, former vice presidents of countries, sitting ministers, and that who really cared, genuinely cared to have a more transparent world, came to the table. And in those early days of 1993, end of 1993 to beginning of 1994, when we started, we were just like a ragtag army of people, all right? But today, Transparency International has been the basis on which a number of changes have happened around the matter of transparency in governance processes, transparency in business, in international business, and many other things that we can talk about. So I first need to encourage you that this journey is not going to be a dash. It will be a marathon, all right? But the fact that you've already started gathering people, I see people, who have joined this call out of Kenya, out of the US, out of Europe, and out of Asia. That is how it starts, all right? So first step is taken. I think that the next step is to do almost like a market research of all kinds of organizations similarly interested, as in citizens' organizations that are similarly interested in what you're trying to do. It would be undermining of your effort to assume that you're the only one who cares about this particular issue. So we've got to find as much big tent to bring many people in from across the world. It has to be a big tent. We must create a big tent that, even for people who don't entirely agree on all the key topics that worry us, but at least they agree on 2, they agree on 3, they are members. Everybody come. Let's first get our big tent. And then after the big tent is convened, we can now begin to negotiate our pecking order of priorities. You'll be surprised how by having some analytical approach and generating data, people may just find that their differences were just in the mind. When you look at it, from basis of facts and figures, that the differences just fall away. All right. So build a big tent. We have to find everyone. That requires a lot of market research, a lot of reaching out and all of that. And then the third thing that I see is that we do need to build from the bottom up. So we do need to unlock the capacity of people in country. You have to have foot soldiers in each country that really cares You know, I mean, there are many people, there are many young people in Nigeria who want a government that is effective. And yet, you know, if you said to them anything about the United Nations, they'll say, that's not my trouble. I don't care about the UN. All right. You want less number of people saying they don't care about the UN in each country. Okay. So when Nigeria says, well, you know, we should have a seat at the permanent, the Security Council, you know, a permanent seat at the Security Council, there are many Nigerian young people who will tell you, you haven't governed that well. So why are you going to look for a seat at the Security Council? They just look at things in that order. But what they don't realize is that the importance of global systems is that it also has its check on even the domestic behavior of people who govern countries. You know, so sometimes people don't make the link. Those global organizations, those regional organizations, they also can moderate and you know, modify the behaviors of those who operate domestic institutions. And so creating a very strong momentum in each country, we got to figure out how to do that, because that bottom-up approach would then mean that legitimacy is coming from each of these countries through the voices for a reform of the United Nations. I think we do need to have that happen. We need to have a program that is designed that basically gives the tools for bringing, even creating country-level big tents of voices. You know, even if you don't have any set of people worried about the UN in country, you would have women worried about the UN. You would have young people worried about the UN. These two constituencies in today's world, one makes up half of today's world, the other one makes up 60% of today's world. These are powerful segments of society, but we haven't unlocked their capacity to see their power and to leverage on one another. All right. So at country level, we've got to build that. And then the fourth thing is the technical level work. The technical level work for me is to actually unbundle the UN. Because when we say UN, people don't seem to realize that it's a fragmented body of people that are in different systems and institutions doing different things. And that the UN has morphed into all kinds of things. Some of the committees that exist are moribund, but they have not been collapsed. They still are there. The mechanisms for solving problems in 1970 are still being used without anybody scrutinizing or questioning it. So an analytical process that is genuinely independent of the UN, something, because when you say to the UN, UN has to reform, and UN says, okay, let's go and find out how to reform ourselves, and we'll come and present it to you at the General Assembly. I am sorry. The law of incentives tells you that clearly there is no incentive on the part of those who are the problem to want to, solve the problem that could take away powers from them. So it means that we do need an independent technical team that is looking at all dimensions of what it is the world is losing in a UN that stays in its current state today. So that technical level work is important. My fifth point would be that even amongst the ones that have a formal political authority in each country today, as in heads of government, ministerial cabinets, and all kinds of authorities at domestic level, and then at the global level of global bodies around the world, there will definitely be allies. We need to find those allies. You cannot assume that it is only someone like an Oby Ezekwesili that is prepared to come publicly to say that the UN system has passed the sell-by date and that it requires, we do need a design. I have been consistent in calling for this. Every time that organizations in Europe or the Americas or anywhere else are asking me to come have this kind of conversation, they know what they are going to get. I am one person who is saying, all of those who are saying we can reform the UN, you are not being truthful. What you're doing is that you're looking at it from a very narrow prism, and you're refusing to bring into the conversation all of these dimensions that are necessary for us to confront. So I am what's the right word to use? I'm an unrepentant advocate for a new system to solve global problems. So you have to find many others with the same kind of voice like myself. They become like your political advisory team for this kind of a journey. You need that. So I've now gone from technical to political. I also talked about country level tent, building of tent. I talked about global building of tent. I talked about, the research to actually identify all the other people for whom this topic is relevant. Me, I stopped talking.
And I mean, yes, I have so many questions, but I'm giving the mic to Koku Muhiel Dorian Moncho. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, and I hope I didn't do a terrible job at it. Please ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mo, for your very brilliant presentation. And I was very happy to hear you today and to learn a lot from you and about this vision that you share with us. But I'm having some stakes actually about this program because, when we talk about UN, UN as a simple aim is UN in French is like one together. So I think that we all think that the system should be equal for everybody. And when we are talking about, when we are seeing the new reactions for example, marginalized countries that are they don't have a power in security council, and how they treat the case. You have, for example, the case of Israel within Gaza. You have also in Sahel region, and all the consequences in human, in population, in inequality, because all these aggravate inequalities. Do you think that within this area, with you, we can have built this kind of sustainable, where there is already all these how to explain it, where people already have something against the system? Will they trust the system to come as one, to be equal in the new system that you are thinking that is the way it should come? So this is my question. I don't know how.
I think the question kind of answers itself, because that's the reason you're gathered. If we could trust that, people who hold formal authorities, whether in our countries, I'm sure, Colombe, that in your country, people would wonder, what's your problem? What's your problem? France is a member of the permanent member. France is in the Security Council. Excuse me, Colombo, what are you campaigning for? So there are people in respective countries that don't understand or appreciate the need for any change. They say nothing is broken. The UN just has a couple of problems here and there. If we can just fix it, so some people say, okay, let's just add one African country as a permanent, member. Let's look for another, some Latin American country and add. And then would that actually really solve for what we're looking for? It wouldn't. And that's why we're saying that, going to the design table with a lot of quantitative analysis is a better way to approach building, a new system, because your quantitative analysis enables you to figure out the gaps. And, I come from this, my mantra is that, in God I trust. Every other person must bring data. You come into me, don't tell me to trust you. Bring data. It's God I trust. But every other human being, just bring data. So I feel like that there's a level of quantitative analysis around the issue of why is today's global system not working for the better. You disaggregated all the way to the point where you get to each individual person in the world, and especially in today's world where algorithms and the power of the AI can help us, just build questions and get to analytics in ways that we couldn't in the past. We may be surprised how the scenarios begin to unpack themselves. And I'm thinking of this on the basis of not using anecdotes. A lot of today's political class use anecdotes to tell us to shut up. You say something is wrong, and they tell you the story of what used to happen in 1960. And it's no longer relevant. 1960 is so way back. In fact, 2015 is so way back compared to where we are today. But you wouldn't know it until you unpacked the data of what has changed. And so I am saying that the question you asked is, there is no incentive for there to be a different approach for solving problems. But by you coming together and building all the way to a global momentum and pressure, the only thing that the political class has ever feared is a collective action success. Collective action success. And so if you build the kind of pressure that makes it difficult for the prime minister, the president of France, for the president of the US, for the president of Nigeria, for the president of Ethiopia, for the president of, for the chancellor of Germany, and all of these people, they can't be comfortable in our world again because all of their citizens are saying, we don't see ourselves in the UN. You may be going there and sitting and having a talk shop, but you're not talking for us. If they are all hearing the same thing, there would be a certain percentage of them who, when the next go, will say, hey, my domestic constituency has put this at the top of the agenda for me. The agenda setting for this has to come through the kind of strategic orientation and approach that you're trying to build.
Thank you. I think it's extremely timely, as I'm sure you've seen Secretary General Guterres was just advocating last week for the United Nations Security Council to now have either the African Union or one African country have a permanent seat. So it's exactly what you mentioned. And obviously for me, it's a very positive step to have more representation, but the problem is the governance system is still not working regardless. So while you may advocate for this short term, long term, we need a better way forward and a better system. And for this, we all need to have a say. I think we have time for one last question. And I've seen a lot of comments about money. So let's talk about money, because you used to be vice president of the World Bank. And if we look at the current global system of governance, or so-called system of governance, one of the big issues is the fact that our international financial system is extremely unfair. It's rooted in historical injustices, inequalities, looting, and more. And some countries continue to suffer as a result of it. Some countries continue to take advantage of it. And we also see, and I'm trying to summarize a question that has 6 different points on loans, etc. We also see high income countries struggling under the fact that they have too much debt, and low to middle income countries struggling under debts that often are unfair, cannot be repaid, etc. So considering the fact that you were vice president of the World Bank, if tomorrow, let's make it a bit longer, in 5 years, we have created such global momentum that we have actually managed to together change the system of governance, and you are suddenly world's Minister of Finance, or World Minister or Secretary of Economy, whatever you call it in different countries, and you have a magic wand and can change the global financial system.
Magic wand. No.
A magic wand. You have it. You can do one thing, that is to change the global financial system. What would you start with? in order to create a system that is less unfair and to be able to address some of the issues I just mentioned?
So, I think that question was always clear in my mind because of the economic philosophy that I subscribe to. I subscribe to the economic philosophy that what you need in order for people to create value and therefore to have the kind of financial leverage that makes them relevant is to make people productive. And so, unlike what we normally see in our world today, where ministers of finance literally just simply address the issues that worry those that are already privileged. And so the strong get stronger. My own Minister of Finance for the world approach would be the one that is saying, how do we bring the people outside of the privilege into opportunity? So a productive mindset for those that are not currently productive, which means that investments, for me, as a Minister of Finance, I'll be interested in where investments go to unlock the opportunities that are stranded. Opportunities are stranded in women, where you see that the productivity of women is adversely impacted by the lack of access to the tools of productivity. And a major part of the tools of productivity, if you took the case of women, say, in entrepreneurship compared to their male counterparts, you find that every time that you marginally improved the access to knowledge, to markets, to finance for women who are entrepreneurs, similar to their male counterparts, if you improved their access to all of these by even a margin of, say, 25%, they ended up outperforming their male counterparts. So these kinds of data would matter to me because it would be about, for every dollar that I want the world to spend, it must go directly to the things that unlock these opportunities, because that's the way I can guarantee a continuing prosperity of the world. If we could invest in that way, so we do know that the one very good quantitative work that at least we do have that came out from the UN is this assemblage of these 17 pillars that are considered the Sustainable Development Goals. You can see that it's turned into just a wish list of aspiration. But when you go, deeper into the analytical work that framed those issues, you would see that these are actually issues which, if well invested in, you can find many more young people. The same thing as I said for the women can be said for young people today. A lot of young people are totally disillusioned because they feel abandoned. They feel abandoned by their governments and they feel abandoned by the world. And yet we know that the global economic structure is changing again. It is changing again. The world that created the kind of economic progress that we saw in the last century, it's changed and changing rapidly. Today, when you think of the Americans right now are simply saying, we want to be the ones that are leading the pack in competitiveness in an AI century, right? Now, many that should be even in the non-AI century are not yet there. And so a minister of finance of the world would have to focus on where are these regions where the world has failed to tap into the incredible opportunities. The second part of it is when you invest in people and they are productive, we now know through economic analysis that exchange of values make a difference in creating more values. And so trade is going to be very important for me. And therefore, I'll bring back everybody to the table of the discussion on trade. Today's WTO is not getting the support that it should get. The WTO has more or less been abandoned to deal with, little issues, whereas the key issues that matter for generating what the Americas and the Europes that preached free trade were carrying the banner for, until the free trade no longer seems to be free in their mind, and now they are walking away from that table of discussion of very tough issues. What we need to bring everybody back, because trade is an important tool of economic growth and development. And so as a finance minister of the world, this lopsided trade system, global trade system, will have to change. We need to put value where value belongs and pay for value where it has been created at the equivalent level of energy that currently enjoys most of it. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oby. I love in your answer that you haven't mentioned the term borders once. As the world finance or economic minister, you'll invest wherever it's much needed, regardless of the geography.
Say that again.
I was mentioning that you didn't mention the word borders or countries once in your answer. As an economic minister, you would invest wherever it's needed, regardless of one's nationality, location, etc., which is at the center of our DNA at Atlas. The idea that we need to be able to work together as one and redistribute our resources and ensure that we live in a better world for us all, not just for a few countries.
Because we all are looking for a world that is orderly, prosperous, and in which everyone has an equality to opportunities to be the best that they can be. All right. So if we're going to get that, then the borders simply collapse.
Yes, I might just use this as a new marketing material.
At where we all collectively place our strength. Yeah. So one of the things that I'd like to see is for you to run for, you should run to be the president, to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. Maybe then when you get there, you can start from the inside. We would believe you, we would trust your effort. And we can then have external and internal pressure for change, because that's always
exactly. And you can then be the chief minister for the economy. What a beautiful world. I can't wait for this one. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know we are out of time and I see more questions, and we'll continue to talk anyhow, but I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. You gave us a lot to think for. And I wanted to mention that this conversation will go to our policy team that is working. We actually published in this week the first draft that has been voted upon of our political program for the United Nations. And a lot of the ideas you mentioned are actually in this first draft. So I'll send it to you. I'm very happy about this. But I couldn't agree more with all of your points on bringing all and different voices to the table to ensure representation, managing to make sure that it's actually answering the needs of people. And giving people a stake in the UN is fundamental, or, at one point it should be replaced with something that can actually deliver.
Yes. And to the person who asked the question, what one reform should we do to the global banking system? I would say push for more transparency. There are still too many things that happen behind closed doors in the banking, in the global financial systems. And that whenever you have opacity and opaqueness, wherever people can do things without disclosure, there is a problem going on. Okay? More transparency.
Exactly. Thank you so much,
everyone.
Dr. Oby. I wish you a wonderful day. And for everyone, have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for